Welcome, everyone, to this very important, very timely emergency briefing. It will address two topics that are of signal importance and that require the most, urgent of attention from not just policymakers and the media and others in elites across the world, but from the people that have an awful lot riding on decisions that will be made or that are in the process of being carried out. The two topics are, first, the war now underway between Israel and Iran, a war that, properly understood, has been underway for over 46 years, a war that has entered a very dramatic and very violent phase in recent days, and that is, as we speak, evident in the possibility that this program will be interrupted for some of our featured presenters from Israel by the possibility of incoming missiles from Iran. The second topic has been in the news of late because there was, until very recently, a planned international conference that would try to advance the cause of a Palestinian state. That conference, sponsored by the UN, has now been postponed. The exact timing of when it will be rescheduled to be determined, but it is clearly the case that the idea of conjuring up a Palestinian state is on the minds of a number of leaders of important nations, and consequently, it is vitally important, especially against the backdrop of the first topic, that we understand what is actually afoot here and what is the most sensible approach to that idea of a state called Palestine. I am happy to be presenting only part of this program under the banner of the Victory Coalition. I am thrilled that we have a partner in doing so, the executive director, as Didi mentioned, of Israel365 Action, Rabbi Pesach Wolicki. He and I will be taking turns in introducing and then commenting on some of the important presentations that are taking place in the course of this program. I want simply to say thank you to Rabbi Wolicki, whose own acumen and insights and leadership on these topics is of surpassing importance. It is a privilege to be able to work with him and his extraordinarily influential organization in bringing to you this emergency briefing, and we look forward to the fruits of it in both the minutes immediately ahead and the days to follow. Rabbi, welcome, and over to you, sir.
Thank you, Frank. And I thank you for the cooperation with the Victory Coalition, for all those Israel365 Action audience members, activists who have joined this webinar. Just to understand, the Victory Coalition is a very important, vitally important coalition of thinkers, activists, influencers who have come together to focus in on the battle. And the battle, when I say the, there is one war we are fighting. And we are fighting a war for civilization. And ultimately, what that really means is that we're fighting a war for the kingdom of God on this earth against those who seek to destroy it. The bizarre alliance that we've gotten used to between atheist progressives and jihadist Sharia supremacists only makes sense through the lens of the fact that they both despise the word of God and fear nothing more than it coming true and being proven to be true. So I'd like to open just my remarks to open this webinar, and then Frank, I'll kick it back to you to introduce our first guest. My remarks to open this webinar, I really would just like to read a psalm and just make a couple comments as I read it. because it's a psalm that teaches us how to think about war. There are probably some activists on this call who were on our emergency prayer call the other night, on Friday, on the day that Israel began attacking Iran, and I shared this then as well, but it's the appropriate way to frame this spiritually, to give us the big picture, because while we will be involved in the minutia and the little picture throughout this webinar, the big picture really tells us where we're going. It's a psalm of Asaph. This psalm is read at the funeral of every fallen Israeli soldier, but it's not a psalm of mourning. It's not about death, at least not about death of our soldiers, but it's read at the funeral of every soldier because it gives us a perspective about how to think about war. The psalm opens by calling on God not to be silent in the face of the enemies of God, who are the enemies of Israel, those who try to prevent the fulfillment of God's prophecies for the nation of Israel. The most repeated prophecy in the Bible is that of the nation of Israel returning to our homeland after a lengthy exile and reconstituting ourselves as a nation. And those who stand against that project are standing against the revelation of God on this earth. Do not keep silent, O God. Do not hold your peace. Do not be still, O God, for behold, your enemies make a tumult, and those who hate you have lifted up their head. They have taken crafty counsel against your people and consulted together against your sheltered ones. They have said, come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be remembered no more. We see from the river to the sea, goes all the way back to biblical times. For they have consulted together with one consent. They form a confederacy against you. The tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagrites, Gabal, Ammon, Amalek. And at the end of this long list of nations in this psalm, two of them are connected with the word with. Philistia with the inhabitants of Tyre. Philistia is pretty much the Gaza Strip, and Tyre is South Lebanon. So all the way back thousands of years ago in this psalm, we were told that there's a special bond between those two enemies of Israel, and we see it happening today. Assyria has also joined with them. They have helped the children of Lot Selah deal with them. We call out to God, as with Midian and with Sisera and Yabin at the brook Kishon, who perished at Ein Dor, who became as refuse on the earth. Make their nobles like Orev and Ze'ev, yes, all their princes like Zebach and Salmunah, who said, let us take for ourselves the pastures of God for a possession. The list of nations over the centuries that has tried to take the pastures of God as their own possession is very long, much longer than in this psalm, and they're not done trying. Oh my God, make them like the whirling dust, like the chaff before the wind, as the fire burns the woods, and as the flame sets the mountains on fire. And I'll add in, as the fires burn the nuclear facilities of the evil Iranian regime, let that continue. So pursue them, God, with your tempest and frighten them with your storm. Fill their faces with shame that they may seek your name, O Lord. Let them be confounded and dismayed forever. Yes, let them be put to shame and perish. And let me drill down on this point. We pray to God to fill our enemies' faces with shame, which sounds a lot like we're just rubbing their noses in it, as though it's not enough to win, but we want them to also feel ashamed. But this is actually a critical point, and it's all about victory. There's no destroying an evil ideology. We learned this with Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. There's no destroying it without the enemy recognizing that they lost, without bringing them to their knees and bringing defeat upon them so that they feel shame, because shame means that they understand the error of their ways. Those Hamas murderers who filmed their atrocities on October 7th felt no shame, just the opposite. We want them to feel shame because we care about their souls. We want them to recognize the evil of their ways, because that truly, ultimately, is the purpose of war. As the psalm ends, that they may know that you, whose name alone is the Lord, are most high over all the earth. Ultimately, we're going to get into the political, geopolitical nitty-gritty right now. But let's remember what our true goal is. It's to bring defeat upon our enemies so that truth shall reign and God's kingdom shall rule the earth. That is victory. That's what the Victory Coalition is about. And that is why Israel365 Action, both taking a political advocacy approach, also is firmly rooted in biblical principles, biblical messaging, biblical faith, because that's what this is about. It's people who believe in the Bible defeating those who would seek to undo God's plan for the world. Back to you, Frank.
Thank you, Rabbi. I so appreciate that spiritual grounding. This is a spiritual war we are facing, and it is one that has Judeo-Christian civilization squarely in its crosshairs. A man who has understood this deeply and been imbued throughout the course of his distinguished career in public service in the United States, originally as a naval intelligence officer and subsequently as a senior advisor to an undersecretary of state, a national security advisor, and a vice president of the United States to counsel them on Middle East policy. Now, a senior analyst and director of the Mideast program at the Center for Security Policy is Dr. David Wurmser. We have caught up with him as he has been trying to make his way to Israel, a trip that was interrupted by the outbreak of the current conflict. And we're very pleased that he's been able to make himself available to us from Rome. Dr. Wurmser, thank you for joining us and for your perspective on the conflicts, both the physical, the spiritual, and the diplomatic, in which we find ourselves as elements of the free world. Over to you, sir.
Sure. First of all, it is very difficult to follow up on what Rabbi Wolicki just said. I mean, that was one of the most exceptional, I think, definitions of the spiritual dimension of this conflict that I've heard. So I commend that, as much as it pains me to compliment you for it. But at any rate, so where are we here? This war, June 12th, we had October 7th. Everybody remembers October 7th. And there was a very famous sentence in Israel, was that what was before October 7th will not be after October 7th. And then when people still get things wrong, you say, well, that's still October 6th thinking. Well, now we have a second date, which is June 12th, or in Israel, it was already June 13th. So what was before June 13th is not going to be what is after June 13th. A river has been crossed, the Rubicon has been crossed, and there's now a fundamental battle going on that cannot be made into a shortcut. It cannot be stopped and managed anymore. If until June 12th, we believed that there was a management issue of Iran's nuclear program that could then also be expanded and have a tougher deal that manages their missile program and their terrorist behavior across the globe and their regional strategic destabilizing behavior and their alliance with the Chinese Communist Party and with Russia and so forth. If we thought that that could be managed with toughness and threats and so forth before June 13th, we've crossed the Rubicon, and now this is no longer something that can be managed. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity. Israel has handed us a once-in-a-generational opportunity to end this problem, to solve it for a generation or two. It's not only a once-in-a-generation opportunity, it is something whose effects can last 2 generations or more, maybe much more. And that is because at the end of the day, while the Israelis started this war focusing on the essential nuclear stuff that they could get and the air defense structures so that they could have freedom of airspace over Iran, and as many of the missiles as they could get, because that's what really threatens Israel. The conflict now has transformed over the last 2-3 days. And we have to remember, this is only a 4-day conflict so far. The conflict has transformed about halfway through, where the speed with which the Iranian regime was destroyed and its assets destroyed, that Israel is now focusing also on hitting regime symbols, regime targets, and most importantly, on chain of command, and also being very successful there as well. with huge assets as well as important command chains destroyed. And that in a military like the Iranians, which is a very top-down command structure without a lot of initiative from below, this is a devastating situation where they can't effectively fight anymore. They can do what they're doing, which is to send missiles, but they can't effectively fight anymore. And now also the airspace is cleaned out. So Israel really now is at the point where the regime is vulnerable at their hands. The Iranian people know it. The Iranian people know that the Israelis are with them against the regime, the tyranny that's been plaguing them. It's very clear that the regime is not popular among the people. So we have a real opportunity here if Israel just keeps going within the next few days, outermost week or two, of potentially toppling the Iranian regime. Now, it's not for the Israelis to topple. It's not for the United States to topple. It's for the Iranians. They've been handed an opportunity. The opportunity will get greater as each hour passes. So the Iranians really have a chance to take their country back. And we all hope that what we've believed for a long time, which is the Iranian people are the ones who most hate the regime and are most suffering under the regime, that they'll seize this opportunity and move forward. Now, there's a problem, though, that's emerged, which is this focus on a deal. This is the thinking from June 12th. Very much like the Gaza war, when emissary Witkoff went and negotiated the ceasefire, having limited staff, he relied on the previous administration to tell him and inform him of things. And unfortunately, while he had good intentions, the framework was a product of the previous administration's paradigms. Well, really, when we're dealing with Iran here, even if you're trying to get a tougher deal than JCPOA, the concept of negotiating a deal with Iran is a legacy of previous administrations that is a paradigm that died on June 12th. So I think we're trapped into that. And the problem is that there's also these voices on the conservative side, let alone on the other side, on the Democratic side, but even dangerously too many on the conservative side. We can name names. There are names like Tucker Carlson and so forth, who are trying to find any rationale for not supporting Israel, stopping this war, never starting this war. And the latest one is, well, if Iran is toppled, if the regime is toppled, it'll be chaos, and America will be dragged into nation build. And once we're in nation building, it's going to be a drain on America, another endless war, thousands killed, again, the thousands killed, and so on and so forth. This is a red herring. Iran is a very proud old nation. It is a real culture. I don't want to be racist. I'm not racist. But Iran is a far more substantial country than Iraq ever was, or frankly, any Arab country ever was. Iran is an ancient culture. It is a very capable people, a highly educated people, and a very industrious people. They wouldn't have survived and succeeded under the thumb of this evil regime as much as they have without that. So the idea of Iran being in dire need of a neo-colonial presence to pick them up from the gutter after a war, I think the Iranians would want nothing more than their dignity back. Now, they may turn to us and they say, listen, we've got our country, we're going to manage, we're going to sort it out, but we're pretty badly wounded here. So if you can help us bring some technicians and experts on the oil sector, or perhaps on the energy sector or something like that, well, that's great. We would love to have some help. That's a whole different ballgame than occupying and nation building. So I think this whole idea that America will be dragged into a nation building exercise is a red herring, deliberately and disingenuously being forwarded to deter us from supporting Israel going all the way. And I think it's critical that Israel goes all the way because Iran is a major link. We saw it already with the war on Ukraine. I don't know where Russia would be right now without Iranian drones and missiles. The Chinese Communist Party has extended its It's a Belt and Road straight through the Middle East. The linchpin of that is Turkey and Iran. Iran is critical. That's why it's right now trying to send some missiles to Iran. It wants to use Iran to bleed the West and to deny the West the clean victory and force it into a mess. And that's Iran. That's China's strategy. So Iran plays a critical role in this. Its survival plays a critical role in this. Whereas, so a victory over Iran that's decisive and complete, which can only come with the regime collapsing, I think at this point is the only productive answer to what Israel has started here. And what we see from Israel, this can be done without American troops on the ground. It can be done without American interest being really threatened. And it can be done without mass death anywhere in the region or in Israel. Even in Iran, the number of Iranians killed so far is very, very low. And frankly, what Israel's done without really damaging Iran's economic infrastructure. It is hitting the oil, that's true, and that's a big part. But grocery stores, distribution networks, fleets of trucks to carry food and so forth, that's all in place. That's all untouched. It's all there and intact. So Iran can pick itself up quite quick. So I think that we're on the precipice of an immense victory of generations. I think it's an imperative that we follow through and let Israel follow through and let the Iranian people speak and do their thing, which is essential. And then my final point, I don't want to take up too much time. My final point is all this talk of a deal, of coming to a deal with Iran, sabotages all that. And the reason for it is your average Iranian is looking at this and he's thinking, should I take to the street? Should I not take to the street? This is a brutal regime. If there's a deal, the first thing this regime will do when that deal takes effect and that ceasefire is implemented, it will slaughter its own people to bring back a sense of fear. And all the people know it. So they're hedging right now. They want to make sure that all this discussion of deals is nothing and that the Israelis are going to go all the way. The Israelis are making it clear they will go all the way. But unfortunately, the United States is a big voice here. And the more we keep talking about a deal, the more we're actually undermining what Israel's doing here. So I really think we need to just step back and just let this play out and just support what's going on and not try to bring it to a premature conclusion and signal to the Iranians that at the end of the day, we'll sell them out for a better JCPOA. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Dr. Wurmser. That, you know, the Iranian people of all Muslim nations, a lot of people don't realize this, have the lowest percentage of mosque attendance per capita. They're actually the least religiously observant, as it were, of all Muslim nations. And what you say also tracks well with the fact that the Iranian people, and we've seen this over and over again, including celebrities and athletes putting their neck out to be pro-Israel in public, they are a pro-Israel population. Just imagine, based on everything you're saying, you know, if we play it forward, if you look at a map and look at the landmass of Iran and where it's located and the size, and imagine a pro-Western educated society occupying that piece of territory, we're not talking about reshaping the Middle East. We're talking about reshaping the world, reshaping the global order, nothing less than that. And we're experiencing that as we speak today. So we'll continue to look to you, as we always do, for guidance to understand these things. I often tell people when I share proudly that I'm friendly with David Wurmser, I say he's forgotten more about the Middle East than most people even know. So thank you so much for that. It's now my honor and pleasure to call on another dear friend of mine, and this is Major Elliott Choddof. He's a reserve major in the IDF. He's the host of a very important podcast that he recently launched called Conflict Uncovered. You will get more inside information and sharp analysis, especially about the military aspects, but also the geostrategic aspects of what is going on in all of Israel's war by listening to Elliott's podcast. For decades, he was a lecturer at the University of Haifa International School, lecturing on Israeli history and society, the Arab-Israeli conflict, terrorism and responses, Arab-Israeli relations. His specific expertise is in many areas, but he's a phenomenal military strategist and is still very involved. I don't know so many people. I'm not going to say your age, Elliott, but I don't know so many people Elliott's age who are still doing reserve duty. But that just speaks to how important Elliott is to the IDF, and he continues to play a very important role also for us, explaining a lot of what goes on here in Israel and the Middle East. And talking about Iran is right in your wheelhouse. So, Elliott, please take the stage.
Thank you, Pesach. I really want to start by zooming out. The war did not begin on June 13th, 2025. This campaign began then. The war actually began when the Khomeini regime came to power and solidified its power in 1979, 1980, at which point it declared two great enemies of the regime. One was Israel, but more importantly was the United States of America. And it's not a coincidence that over the years, the Iranian leadership has referred to America as the great Satan and Israel as the little Satan. Remember, this is a theocratic regime. When they refer to Satan, they're not talking about big in geographical terms and little in geographical terms. America is the great Satan because it is the great evil in the world, and Israel is an extension of that. In addition, Khomeini personally and his regime are vicious Nazi-style anti-Semites. So those two toxic sort of ingredients bring us to where we are today. But I think it's important to mention along the way, this is a regime that already in its first year took the American embassy in Tehran with holding hostages, created an organization called Hezbollah, which blew up the U.S. embassy in Beirut twice, the U.S. Marine barracks in the 1980s. And I won't go through the long and horrific list of what Iran, its agents, and its proxies have done to both Israel and the United States, but simply to emphasize the point that this war did not start 4 days ago, it started decades ago. Along the way, with all of their threats, and when they chanted death to Israel and death to America, what they really mean is death to Israel and death to America. They have developed capabilities to put into practice what was essentially looked upon in the West as rhetoric, and that includes this massive ballistic missile system, which we've been taking out, and of course, a nuclear weapons program, which through the years there have been attempts to slow down, all of which have been unsuccessful. What brings us to June 13th is an interesting coincidence of events that start paradoxically on October 7th. Dr. Wurmser talked about October 6th and before, different world. Those of us who've looked at the Iran threat over the years looked at it in a certain way, and especially from the Israeli perspective, keeping in mind that Hezbollah, as Iran's agent, by the way, not proxy, but agent, was a very, very severe second strike threat against Israel. In other words, if Israel struck Iran, it would also have to contend with hundreds of thousands of rockets from Hezbollah as well. And of course, others around, like Hamas, Islamic Jihad. In other words, Iran would be a difficult nut to crack, on top of which air defense systems and the like, making it virtually impossible for Israel to launch a concerted and continuous air campaign against Iran. And then October 7th came along, and I won't go to a month by month, but just sort of a summary of results. Hamas is out of the picture. Hezbollah has been neutralized, at least for the time being. They're not finished yet, but for now, they're out of the picture. As a result, Syria collapsed, and we now have a no man's land from the Israeli perspective vis-a-vis Iran. And suddenly, all of this comes together to allowing Israel the ability to strike as it did on June 13th. Now, before I go into that, I just want to say one more thing, and that is that, as Pesach mentioned, this is a subject that I've been dealing with for a couple of decades, and in lectures and courses, always being asked, when will Israel strike? Because it's always been my contention that Israel, when push comes to shove, Israel will never permit Iran to get a nuclear weapon capability. And my answer was always at the last possible moment. I don't know what the date will be, but Israel's not going to strike earlier than it has to, because going to war, in other words, launching a campaign of this type, carries with it risk and carries with it cost. And we know that. We would rather not do it, but we will do it if we have to. June 13th was that last possible moment. The possibility of a negotiated JCPOA 2.0, which would have left Iran with a military capability, with a nuclear capability, and let's be serious, and the International Atomic Energy Authority said it clearly, they cheat. I know many of us were shocked by that. I wasn't. It all basically came into place at that moment. Now, why Thursday night and not Friday night? My guess is that has more to do with immediate tactical issues that aren't all that relevant. But on that night, essentially, Israel, with years of preparation, launched a multi-level, complex strike against Iran. We know today that it included Mossad drones that were already based in Iran, that were being built in Iran, targeting leadership. And here, let me just say as an aside, because we've seen it with Hamas and Hezbollah as well, this is not targeted assassination in the classic sense of taking out a leader, as the United States did with Soleimani a number of years ago during Trump's first administration. That has an effect, but it doesn't have the devastating effect of taking out 50, 60, or 70% of the command echelon of a system in one swoop, basically paralyzing the system. You can replace an individual. It's very, very difficult to replace an entire echelon, and the Iranians are finding that now as well. Beyond all expectations, and here I give extremely high grades, not only to the intelligence sources who set up the targeting, the Mossad, of course, who set up its targeting and striking, the pilots who flew the strikes, and the unsung heroes in all of this, the ground crews and the mechanics who made sure that those planes actually got to the targets and got back. And anybody's familiar with long-range air campaigns, the fact that, as far as we know, and I say as far as we know because there may be unreported losses, but they're insignificant in terms of numbers, to have virtual 100% launch and return on a combat mission is a near miraculous credit to the mechanics and the ground crews who are keeping those planes flying. And it brings us essentially to where we are today. The Iranian leadership is on the ropes. They know it. They are in behind the scenes attempts to try to come back to the table. As Dr. Wurmser said, they would like nothing better to get an agreement now. In the meantime, their air defenses have been destroyed. Their air force is neutralized. Their nuclear weapons and development system is being degraded. We're not there yet, and it's still an open question whether the Israeli Air Force is capable of taking out everything that's on the ground and, more importantly, below ground. But here I'm going to leave an open question mark, especially under the circumstances of today, and which is, will Israel rely only on its Air Force on some of these targets? And last but not least, the weakness of the regime itself. Will this push the opposition to the point where it says, okay, we're going to take the chance and we're going to try to drive these people out once and for all? I'll conclude by saying this and basically reiterate what Dr. Wurmser said and just put it in slightly different terms. If Israel stops, if it is forced to stop, and the only country that can stop Israel by force is the United States of America, it will not end the war. It will end this campaign and simply guarantee that the war will continue until Iran is ready to do it again, and either Israel will be forced to do it again or face the consequences of Iran taking the first strike.
Thank you, Major Choddof. An extraordinarily important point to end on. Your beginning, as was mine, was the beginning of this war. It wasn't last Friday. The end of this war, if it is not prosecuted to a decisive victory by Israel with help in appropriate and basically very modest ways from the United States, it will indeed continue and continue to metastasize for Israel and for others in the region, assuredly, and for us, I believe. And that is so for reasons that are in part spiritual, if you wish to call them tremendously diabolical motivations of the Iranian mullahs, spiritual. But they will be addressed very powerfully by one of our colleagues. His name is Robert Spencer. He is the director of a marvelous online resource, Jihad Watch, which is a project of the David Horowitz Freedom Center, now being run by one of our subsequent speakers, we're very pleased to say. Robert Spencer is the author of, I believe at this point, some 30 books, many of them extraordinarily detailed and scholarly and, well, brilliantly written, but powerful depictions of Islam, of Sharia, of jihad. And it is appropriate, I think, to our efforts to present the facts, what the people of America, what the people of Israel, what the people of the free world need to know about this enemy that we all confront in the form of what I think of as the mullahocracy of Iran. We're delighted to have Robert by video. He was unable to be with us in person, but let's go to his video now. Sound?
Oleg, I don't have any sound. Stop share and make sure that the settings are correct.
Are you saying there is no sound?
There's no sound, Oleg.
Let me try. Is there a sound now?
It's paused.
Yeah, but was there a sound when I played it?
No.
No.
No sound.
Still no sound?
Nope.
We should go to our next speaker.
Let's do that.
Do
Do you want to take
have
it?
the box at the bottom of the settings clicked, Oleg? Make sure that that video box is to optimize video is clicked. You might have to stop share to do that.
I think we should go back to Rabbi Wolicki and have him introduce our next speaker, and we will come back to Robert Spencer once the sound is correct.
So maybe we'll go out of the original order. Maybe we'll go to Itamar now. Does that
That
work?
would be fine. Sure.
Okay. All right. Am I on stage?
You
Okay.
are.
You are
All right,
on.
great. All right, thank you, everyone.
Great.
Sorry for the technical difficulties here. We, as Frank said in the opening of this webinar, we're looking not only at the major events that are happening vis-a-vis Iran and their importance, but also in the larger picture. As we've said, this is all really one war, and everything is all interconnected. And the original plan for this webinar was actually to respond to this nefarious conference on Palestinian statehood. And then we had a whole debate internally. Do we just chuck the webinar? Do we do it only about Iran? And then we said, no, actually, this is all really one war. And on the issue of the what we call the two-state delusion in the title to this webinar, and what it really means when people in the West talk about a two-state solution, talk about a Palestinian state, largely they don't really know what this means. And a lot of that has to do with the deception and the lies of our enemies, but general issues of what we call information warfare that our side has unfortunately lost in the public sphere. But one of the great information warriors who has really been providing information for decades about the truth about the Palestinian Authority and on that whole issue, someone that I turn to for expertise and occasionally rip off his material, although I always attribute. But it's my honor to introduce Itamar Marcus, the director of Palestinian Media Watch. If you don't follow Palestinian Media Watch and don't get their emails, you should, you must. Critical information, and it will arm you with so much that you can bring to others who don't fully understand the dangers of the situation. So Itamar Marcus, again, director of Palestinian Media Watch and the author of Deception, Betraying the Peace Process. Itamar, please join the stage.
Oh, thank you very much, Pesach. And I just want to say that as many times as you want to rip off our material and use it, please go ahead. We're happy for everyone to take our material and use it as much as possible. That's why we produce it. There's a connection, I think, a very interesting connection right now between the Iran war and what's going to happen with Israel and the Palestinian front afterward. And as you know, and as you talked about, there was supposed to be a conference this week at the UN where there were a number of allies of Israel, friends of Israel, France, England, Canada. These were certainly friends of Israel for many years. They were going to the UN to promote the idea of a Palestinian state. Israel, of course, was against it. The United States has been against it. But I think something is going to happen after Iran. Now, something very interesting happened during this beginning of this Iran conflict. All these countries that have been critical of Israel for many months now, because of what's going in Gaza, and I'll talk about Canada, France, England, and Germany as well, all of a sudden are behind Israel, and which is good. Israel needs it. France has said they might help us in defense. England said they might help us in defense. Germany has been supportive of us. Let's jump ahead to the day after Iran. Please God, it should be a completely successful war, as good as that can be. Let's not even define it now. All of these countries that have been behind Israel now are going to be coming to Israel and say, okay, it's payback time. We helped you through this existential conflict. Now we want you to compromise with the Palestinians. In fact, they'll say, you know what? Your biggest enemy is gone. You can take a chance now for peace. Your biggest threats all around you are gone. All you have left now is one adversary, and just compromise and you'll have peace with the Palestinian Authority. And I think what Israel is going to have to come and say very clearly to the world, and we should have said this for the longest time, is that the Palestinian Authority is a terror entity. It's not a peace partner. It's not just a little bit of a problem. It's not just a problem that they pay salaries to terrorists. It's everything about the Palestinian Authority. And what I want to do is run very quickly through what I would call 10 categories of behavior of the Palestinian Authority, each one just a few seconds, that show without a doubt that this is a terrorist organization, or at worst, or at least a terrorist supporting entity. And this is and in fact, the conclusions I'll talk about at the end from that. Now, since the Palestinian Authority has been established, I would say seems like about 4,000 Israelis have been killed because of the Palestinian Authority. Now, it's critical. This has not been because the Palestinian Authority security services haven't been successful in fighting terror. but it's because the Palestinian Authority has embraced terror, incentivized terror in every way as possible. Now, let me give you some of those categories I was talking about. First category I'll just talk about is October 7th. Everybody blames October 7th correctly on Hamas, but everybody seems to forget that the Palestinian Authority has completely supported October 7th. And I want to just give you a couple of statements that were made here. Jibril Rajoub, one of the top Palestinian leaders, possibly the next Palestinian leader, said, quote, October 7th was full of epics and acts of heroism. Heroism, all the rape and murder and beheading, this was heroism. Just about a month and a half ago, Mahmoud Abbas's advisor, Mahmoud Abbas, on TV 5 times said that what happened on October 7th was legitimate resistance. Now, Mahmoud Abbas himself, in an interview that was just published 2 weeks ago, I want you to listen to it, Mahmoud. He was asked, what do you think about October 7th? And his answer was, October 7th was an attack that shook the foundations of the Israeli entity, exposed the claims that they had an invincible army, and he went listing more and more terrible things that happened to Israel. And he said, but all this wasn't worth it because of the damage to Gaza. In other words, there was nothing wrong with October 7th. It was, in fact, wonderful, but it wasn't worth it because of the damage afterward. So the PA embraces October 7th. Hamas did it. The PA embraces it. Now, Palestinian Authority is a genocide promoting entity. Since the PA was established, they have been having religious leaders come on TV telling their people that this is not a territorial war, but it's a religious war against the Jews. And I'll just give you one quote that we have heard 7 times in the last few months. The most recent time was just a week ago by official people on official Palestinian TV. The quote goes as follows, count the thieving Jews one by one, kill them one by one, don't leave even one. Now that's a call for extermination of the Jews. That's a call for genocide. It's happened not once, but I said 7 times in recent months, and many times over the years they've been called for genocide of the Jews. This is the PA. The PA says it's a religious war against the Jews, which will end with the extermination of the Jews. Every terrorist who is killed fighting against Israel, the Palestinian Authority defines as a shaheed. Now, what's a shaheed? People don't know. In English, it's translated martyr. This is not a martyr. Shaheed comes from the root of the word witness or testimony. In Hebrew, it's similar, edut. If a person is a shaheed, it means they died for Allah. In other words, the Palestinian Authority says that a terrorist who blows himself up and killed 10, 20, sometimes even more Israelis, these people died for Allah. In other words, the PA is telling the people murdering Jews is what Islam wants. It's what we as Palestinian Muslims want. This is a religious war to kill Jews and to kill Israelis. Now, the United States funds the Palestinian Authority security services. Palestinian Authority security are being funded to fight terror. Palestinian Media Watch released a report showing that the Palestinian Authority security services are neck deep in terror itself. And I just want to read to you one quote from the spokesperson of the security services who are supposed to be fighting terror. And he says as follows, quote, the security force members today, as they always were in the battlefields against Israel, while many of them are falling as martyrs and wounded and are filling the Israeli prisons. He was bragging in this entire op-ed that he wrote that the security services are on the forefront of fighting Israel. The report that we made documents dozens and dozens of examples of senior Palestinian Authority security forces people being senior members of the Palestinian Authority terror organizations, such as primarily the Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigades. Recently, there was a funeral of a terrorist from the Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigades. It was a military funeral by Palestinian Authority security forces, and he was wearing his headband of the Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigades as he was buried at this funeral. So the security forces paid by America to fight terror are actively participating and promoting terror. Role modeling for children. The Palestinian Authority has named schools, summer camps, you name it, after terrorists. I'll just give you a couple of examples. Dalal Mughrabi murdered 37 people, 12 children in a bus hijacking. She has 5 Palestinian Authority schools named after her. Abu Jihad killed 125 people, or was responsible for the death of 125, has 5 schools named after him. Salah Khalaf, responsible for the Olympic massacre, 5 schools. Kids grow up seeing terrorists as role models, not as as people to avoid, but as people to emulate and to copy. Of course, number 6 is incentivizing terror through the pay for slay. Everybody knows this is something we, Palestinian Media Watch, exposed in 2011. By now, the entire world knows this. And this alone should be enough to declare the Palestinian Authority a terror entity. They are literally rewarding terrorists in prison just because they murdered Israelis and went to prison. Palestinian Authority education. I want to give you some examples from a report that we released called Teaching Terror to Tots. This focuses on Palestinian Authority, Fatah, informal education in their educational magazine for kids. Quote, the evil occupation state is an artificial state. It's artificial because it's foreign. In other words, Jews have no history, have no right. Palestine is destined for full liberation from the zoke of the Zionist colonialism. Palestine will be liberated and purified from the occupation's defilement. Jews defile Palestine. Again, getting into the religious war. Our presence here defiles Palestine, according to them. Therefore, Israel is destined for destruction. This is children's education in the Palestinian Authority. Number 8 is that we have dozens and dozens of examples of the Palestinian Authority children's activities celebrating October 7th, right after October 7th. And I'll give you one example. A child speaking on October 7th at a school celebration, a few days after October 7th, as follows. October 7th will be a date that historians will mark in the coming years as a historic day that brought us joy and restored our hope for liberation. This is PA official schools celebrating October 7th. The Palestinian Authority media has regular programs glorifying terror. They interview terrorists' families every week. On the anniversary of the worst terror attacks, they always have events celebrating the worst terror attacks. It is absolutely turns terrorism into a fundamental thing. Now, finally, and number 10, and maybe this is the most important, it's not what the Palestinian Authority does, it's the result of what the Palestinian Authority has done. And I want to just read to you 4 polls which tell the whole story of why there cannot be a Palestinian Authority state and why the PA, not only the leadership, but the people, are part of a terror entity. Right after October 7th, Palestinians were asked, was October 7th a correct decision? 83% said it was a correct decision. Now, a month ago, Palestinians were asked that same question. Was October 7th a correct decision? And what is the answer just now? 59% still say it was a correct decision. Now, I'm talking about Palestinians not in Gaza, but in Judea and Samaria, West Bank. The Palestinians in the West Bank still today, 60% say, in spite of losing 55,000 people, according to their lies, but the lies that they believe, they think one day of slaughtering, murdering, raping, and beheading Jews made everything that happened the correct decision. And then one final poll question. They were just asked also a month ago, should Hamas disarm in the Gaza Strip in order to stop the Gaza war? And 85% of Judea and Samaria Palestinians said no, they don't want Hamas to disarm. In other words, Hamas rules the Palestinian population. Hamas wants the Palestinian population in Judea and Samaria wants the war to continue and Hamas to stay in power. So creating a Palestinian state, no matter who would be at the head of it, within one election would elect a terror entity just like Hamas or Hamas by a different name. So Palestinian Authority already today is a terror entity. It should be designated a terror entity. And I think Israel would be very wise before we come to that situation where all the world is pressing on us to accept a Palestinian state. We should go on the offensive, take all this material, which I have shown you here today, and I've supplied the Israeli Foreign Ministry and government with, and we should declare the Palestinian Authority a terror entity.
Thank you very much, Itamar Marcus. A powerful presentation. Again, just the facts, ma'am, as to what would be the choice of these Western nations that are insisting that a Palestinian state must emerge from what has taken place since October 7th. Unmistakably a reward for the violence and that would be the case even if it were not Hamas, but the Palestinian Authority, for the reasons that Itamar has amply documented. Do we have Robert Spencer available now? If so,
when we speak about the conflict between Israel and the Islamic Republic of Iran, it's important to step back and ask why there's any conflict at all. In the first place, there is no actual reason why these two countries should be at odds with one another. They share no common border. They do not have competing territorial claims. They do not have economic interests that clash with one another. They don't have any of the elements that ordinarily lead to conflict between nations. So what is it that actually makes for the conflict between Israel and the Islamic Republic of Iran? It's all about Islamic jihad. The Islamic Republic hates Israel precisely because it is an Islamic Republic. If Iran were not an Islamic Republic, then it would have no quarrel with Israel. The proof of that is immediately in the fact that Israel and the Shah of Iran and the Kingdom of Iran, they had no conflict. In 1979, when the Ayatollah Khomeini toppled the Shah with the help of Jimmy Carter and established the Islamic Republic, that is the beginning of the antagonism between Israel and Iran. Not because Israel did anything, but because as an Islamic Republic, Iran was bound to follow the Quran. The Quran states in chapter 2, verse 191, very simply, drive them out from where they drove you out. Now, the Arab Higher Committee actually told the Arabs in Palestine to leave the area that was the new state of Israel in 1948. It is a historical myth that the Palestinian Arabs, they weren't actually yet Palestinians, that the Palestinians weren't invented until 1964, but that's another story. The Arabs in Israel were told to leave by the Arab Higher Committee because the neighboring Arab states were going to make war upon the new Jewish state and destroy it. And then the Arabs would be able to return to their home. In the meantime, they would be out of the line of fire. So that is not the impetus for Muslims to invoke today the phrase, drive them out from where they drove you out. The impetus for that comes from earlier, that the land that is now the state of Israel was ruled by the Ottoman Empire under Islamic law. And before that, the Abbasid Caliphate ruled the area under Islamic law. And consequently, the idea in Islamic theology is that because there is this imperative from Allah to drive out anyone who is occupying land that was once ruled by the Muslims, that this is an imperative that they have as a religious duty, that the Muslims must drive the Israelis out and reestablish Islamic law, for any land once ruled by Islamic law belongs by right to the Muslims forever. And that is the traditional understanding of the phrase, drive them out from where they drove you out, in Islamic theology. So even if one acknowledges that the Arabs were not driven out by the Israelis in 1948, this verse still applies. And you must understand, this is a verse of the Quran. The Quran, as the holy book of the Muslims, every word in it is considered to have been spoken by Allah. Consequently, this command is on par with the 10 Commandments for Jews and Christians. It's not negotiable. You can't sit down at a negotiating table with the President of the United States and the Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, or anybody you want to name, and make an agreement that would cancel out this imperative. The agreement to establish a Palestinian state or to come to some accord with Israel might be an intermediate step toward destroying Israel altogether. But the Islamic imperative remains to ultimately destroy Israel completely. If Israel were the size of a postage stamp, the Muslims would still have an obligation before the supreme creator of the universe to drive out any Israelis from that tiny land and destroy it completely. And so the Islamic Republic of Iran, as an Islamic republic, views the imperative to destroy Israel as a divine responsibility, a command they have from their God. As a result, they have this antagonism toward Israel. Otherwise, there would be no reason for these two countries to be at odds. This is fundamentally misunderstood all over the West. There is not a single government in Europe or North America, including that of the Trump administration, that takes into account the Islamic imperatives that drive this entire conflict. But in any case, the fact that this conflict is religious at its core means that there can never be any lasting accord between the Islamic Republic of Iran and Israel. If the Islamic Republic were to fall, which we should all be hoping for and praying for at this moment, then there could be an accord between a restored kingdom, the Shah, if the Shah's son takes over, as he has stated his willingness to do, if a constitutional republic is established, then there could be peace with Israel. But as it is, no. And so, when Trump is speaking about making a deal with the Iranians, we can only hope that he is either playing chess, as seems to be the case, actually, in light of the fact that the Iranians were caught flat-footed by the Israeli attack, and they seemed to have been fooled by news stories stating that there had been a rift between Trump and Netanyahu in regard to the advisability of striking Iran. But if the Trump administration is actually genuinely thinking that they can come to some accord with Iran, then they have not taken sufficient account of the importance of Islamic theology in the thinking of the Islamic Republic and of the central place of taqiyya in Shiite Islamic theology. Taqiyya is deception of the unbelievers, and it is Sunni as well as Shiite. However, taqiyya as a theological concept in Islam was devised by Shiites because they kept on being persecuted by Sunnis, and so they elaborated a very complex and detailed doctrine of deception that allowed them to pretend to be Sunnis when under pressure from Sunnis, or as the Sunni theologian Sayyid Abu Allah Maududi says, that they can pretend to be on the side of their enemies when under various kinds of pressure. And so the Islamic Republic of Iran, as a Shiite theocracy, takes taqiyya quite seriously. Jafar as-Siddiqui, the sixth imam of the 12 imams of the Shia, actually said that if you're not practicing taqiyya, you're not a Muslim. And taqiyya is central to one's Islamic commitment. It's that important. And so then we look at the Islamic Republic and they say that they're willing to talk to Trump and come to some kind of an accord. It should always be in the forefront of the negotiators' minds, Witkoff or whomever. It should be in the forefront of their minds. These people are lying to us. It's not a matter of being uncharitable toward them or being Islamophobic or racist or any of that nonsense. It's simply taking into account their own stated theology as a Shiite Islamic Republic. And so, as the situation continues to unfold between Iran and Israel, at this point, the biggest mistake that the Trump administration could possibly make would be to rein in Israel and to try to compel it to come to the negotiating table and work out some accord with Iran. Any such accord would only be pursued by the Iranians in order to further their own interests, which involve destroying Israel utterly as soon as they possibly can. This is a state that has repeatedly vowed that Israel will not last the next 25 years, has repeatedly had its leaders screaming death to Israel and death to America. This is not, in other words, a regime that's going to operate in good faith. in a manner that we can trust. So at this point, the best thing that the Trump administration can and should do is let Israel finish the job. And if we see total success in this regard, the Islamic Republic itself will fall. Its own people hate it. They have turned away not just from the Islamic Republic, but from Islam itself in large numbers. A survey a couple of years ago showed that only 40% of Muslims today only 40% of Iranians today can even consider themselves to be Muslims. So the Israeli offensive is a tremendous opportunity for those people. The people of Iran deserve better than the Islamic Republic. Now is their chance to topple the Islamic Republic. The attacks from Israel could help bring that about. There is no possible justification for stopping them at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to Robert Spencer in absentia in his video. And we have another important speaker who sent in a video. And this video was done before Israel attacked. And this webinar is really all about gaining a broader perspective. And Robert Spencer there is giving us the broader perspective on the Islamic theology that informs what we're seeing politically in negotiations and whatnot. And by the same token, our next speaker, Ambassador Yoram Edinger, he's the former Minister for Congressional Affairs with the rank of Ambassador at the Embassy of Israel to the United States. And that was many years ago. He's the editor of the Edinger Report and really is one of the elder statesmen and greatest experts on Israel and its enemies. And I advise everyone to go to the Edinger Report, go to that website. He is constantly putting out information that is so critical to understanding the threats to the state of Israel. And in this video that he recorded, it is a perspective on Palestinian statehood recorded before the Iranian attacks this past Thursday that takes into account the geopolitical implications of a Palestinian state beyond Israel. So let's go ahead. Oleg, the Yoram Edinger video, please.
Thank you very much for having me on. It's my pleasure and my privilege. What I would like to do is refer to U.S. policymakers, U.S. research institutes, U.S. media, academia, reference to the proposed Palestinian state, which is based mostly on Palestinian, very polished talk. And obviously, when they address Western interlocutors, Western audience, they use moderate music, which they do not use when they address Arab audiences, Arab interlocutors. And when it comes to Arab leaders, Arab countries, they are very well aware of the difference between the Palestinian talk and the Palestinian walk. And not only walk towards Israel, but walk as far as Arabs are concerned. And this is the Palestinian walk, which has earned them, so to speak, the role model reputation for intra-Arab terrorism, intra-Arab subversion, and intra-Arab treachery. Arabs, unlike Westerners, pay attention to history. They remember very well the 1950s Palestinian terrorism, along with the Muslim Brotherhood against the Egyptian host. Egypt allowed the Palestinians to terrorize Israel in the 1950s from the Gaza Strip, but about 2 years later, the Palestinians joined the Muslim Brotherhood in Cairo, Alexandria, terrorizing their host government. They had to run away to Syria, which allowed them to terrorize Israel. But after about 2 years, they once again joined forces with the Muslim Brotherhood, terrorizing the Syrian host. They had to run away to Jordan. The late King Hussein allowed them to terrorize Israel. Some 250 Israelis were murdered by Palestinian terrorism coming from Jordan. But then the Palestinian leadership said, why only terrorize Israel? Why not take over control of Jordan, since Palestinians constitute majority in Jordan. That triggered a very, very ruthless, bloody civil war, and they had to run away from Jordan to Lebanon. They plundered southern Lebanon, and then they aimed at Beirut in order to take over control of Lebanon. That triggered once again a series of civil wars. That was the cause also for the Christians in Beirut to ask the Syrian military to invade Lebanon in order to snatch Lebanon from the jaws of the PLO, and that lasted basically until 1982, when the Palestinian leadership was expelled from Lebanon to Tunisia. In August of 1990, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. Kuwait at that time was by far the most generous Arab host for Palestinians. All of them, all the Palestinians, associates, relatives, allies of Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas, and they allowed the Palestinians to rise to top business and administrative positions. They levied 5% excise tax on Palestinian salaries, transferring that excise tax to the stashed accounts of Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas throughout the world. And it was that generous hostess that they stabbed in the back, joining Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait in August of 1990. Arabs are very well aware of that, and they know that leopards don't change spots. They only change tactics. And the Arabs are also aware that systematically the Palestinian leadership aligned itself with anti-American, anti-Western radical forces in the world. Nazi Germany, then the Soviet bloc, then Ayatollah Khomeini. The Palestinians were the #1 training camp for international terrorists from Latin America, Asia, Africa, and Europe, and obviously the Middle East. Palestinians aligned themselves with Muslim Brotherhood terrorists, which is the largest Sunni Muslim terrorist in the world, has been so since the 1950s. We're talking about Palestinian leadership aligning itself with North Korea, with Cuba, with Venezuela, with obviously Russia and China. And the conclusion by Arab leaders is that while they shower Palestinians with embracing talk, they have refrained from 1948 until today from any tangible move to produce a Palestinian state, because they are very well aware that the track record of the Palestinians, irrespective of their rhetoric, guarantees that a Palestinian state would add fuel, not water, to the Middle East fire. They are very well aware that a Palestinian state west of the Jordan River would doom the pro-American, pro-Western Hashemite regime east of the Jordan River. They know very well that that would transform Jordan into another platform for anti-American, anti-Western, anti-Saudi, anti-Emirati, anti-Egyptian Islamic terrorism. They know that this platform of terrorism will not be limited only to the Jordanian geography. It will spill over to Sinai, first of all, and from Sinai into Egypt, namely, once again, Palestinian Muslim Brotherhood collaboration, this time against the pro-American Sisi regime in Egypt. They know that terrorist state in Jordan would mean domino scenario, ripple effect southward into the Arabian Peninsula, and that would threaten very, very much the survival of every single pro-American Arab oil-producing regime in the Persian Gulf area. And mind you, this is the area with 48% of global oil reserves. The transformation of Jordan into a terrorist state as a result of establishing a Palestinian state west of the Jordan River could transfer control of 48 of the global oil reserve into the hands of anti-American entities such as Russia and China, the Ayatollahs of Iran, the Muslim Brotherhood. That would have a very painful impact on American economy, on Western economy, and certainly once the Arabian Peninsula is transformed from an pro-American area into an anti-American, anti-Western area, this could be a deadly setback to trade between Asia and Europe. The bottom line is that while the Palestinian rhetoric, very polished rhetoric, could mislead Westerners into assuming that a Palestinian state would be a reformed state, we should realize since the Oslo Accords of 1993, Palestinians have been committing themselves to a reformed Palestinian Authority. And what we have seen is that while that was the talk, the walk has been as despotic, as ruthless, as terroristic as it has always been. And therefore, when it comes to the idea of a Palestinian state, it should not be decided based on pro-Israel or pro-Palestinian sentiments. It should not be decided based on honest broker type of attitude. It should be decided from the point of view of, is it undermining American interest or is it advancing American interest? Observation of the Palestinian reality of the last 70 to 80 years leaves no doubt that a Palestinian state would severely undermine American interest.
I guess I'll take it. I thought that Frank was going to take over here. So I just want to mention that member of Knesset, Ohad Tal, is not going to make it. He was on the original program. He sits on the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee in the Knesset, and they have been meeting pretty much around the clock. And I've been in touch with his office, and he sends his best regards, but he's not going to make it. Frank, I'll kick it over to you.
Thank you, Pesach. I wanted to say thank you to Jorn Medinger as well. Very important further amplification of the underlying realities here, ladies and gentlemen. These are conditions that govern whether we like it or not, whether we want it to be different or not. And as long as they do, policies that ignore them, policies that flout them, are doomed to fail. We're going to have another very important contributor from the David Horowitz Freedom Center, in fact, the successor to the man whose name is proudly displayed by that organization. His name is Daniel Greenfield. He is, I believe, a polymath, an extraordinarily brilliant public intellectual, author, and leader in this particular space. We are proud to have him as one of our very, very important contributors to the Victory Coalition. He is the author most recently of Domestic Enemies, the Founding Fathers' Fight Against the Left. And we are delighted that he has been able to join us to talk a bit about these two aspects of the war in which we, here in the United States, as well as Israel, find ourselves. Daniel, over to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Rabbi Wolicki, and thank you to anybody who is participating in this and listening to it. So Ambassador Ettinger mentioned domino theory. In the past, domino theory has been working against Israel. Lately, Israel has been making domino theory work for it. The dominoes have been toppling. At this point, the only ones still standing with Iran are the Houthis in Yemen. We'll see for how long. Hezbollah has basically announced, sorry, guys, we don't really feel like joining it right now. We broke our ankle. We're not right up to it. Kataib Hezbollah, which is the jihadist militias, Shia jihadist militias in Iraq, came out and said basically that they're confident that Iran can take care of themselves. The various statements of support coming in to Iran are basically very muted. The statement from Pakistan was basically something along the lines of, well, we would be happy to help, assuming that there's any escalation and Iran can't handle it. So they're giving these kinds of backhanded compliments to Iran, while at the same time disguising the fact that they are not interested in getting involved. And Iran's whole plan had been to build this big regional coalition, to use that coalition to crush Israel and push out the United States. Right now, that coalition looks to be in pretty poor shape. The Houthis are overcompensating, they're overdoing their part of it, but everybody else right now is staying very, very quiet, and they're very worried about having any activity in Iraq because that might set off the United States. In the past, they've used Iraqi militias to target American interests, American soldiers. At this point, they are very, very cautious about providing any pretext for the United States to actually go ahead and get involved. So right now, Iran is looking pretty isolated. The dominoes have been toppling the other way. And what Israel did is especially extraordinary because the United States, after 9/11, for all our big talk, we never actually confronted the sponsors, the forces behind al-Qaeda. Even when we knew that Osama bin Laden was hiding out in Pakistan under the protection of the Pakistani military, rather than actually directly confront Pakistan, we launched our raid into Pakistani territory. We never actually held Pakistan accountable. We still are not remotely holding Pakistan accountable. We certainly did not hold the Saudis or anybody else accountable. We simply pretended that there was this particular terrorist group. We sanctioned some of the financiers of it, but we never connected it to state action. And for a long time, Israel has been dealing with terrorism by not connecting it to state action, by treating it simply as this local phenomenon, which enabled a propaganda campaign that portrayed terrorism by Hamas, by Islamic Jihad, for that matter, by the Palestinian Authority, as just being this local response to Israel. Israel is Goliath, the terrorists are David. And that fundamentally inverted the whole picture, which is actually the one that we knew all along, which is that 7, 8 more Arab governments, Arab states were attacking Israel from the very beginning and trying to destroy it. And that the entire business of terrorism out of Gaza had actually begun under Egypt, under Egyptian sponsorship, as part of the deal between the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and the Egyptian military, which seized power before Israel controlled Gaza, before the Six-Day War. Only once Israel actually reclaimed Gaza was this idea that there is terrorism inside Israel. Before, there was terrorism coming from Gaza under Egyptian control. So this moral inversion was enabled by Israel just focusing on terrorism as this local problem, and it also enabled the push for a so-called Palestinian state, because the whole problem was simply that they did not have the state. I won't go into the obvious counter-arguments about this, including the status of the so-called West Bank and the Gaza Strip before the Six-Day War, which made it very clear that there was no interest in a so-called state to begin with. That was never on the agenda. But the more Israel just dealt with the terrorism locally, the more it was successfully distracted, diverted, and tied down. And this was certainly what Iran was hoping for. October 7th was in large part motivated by this idea that Israel would be involved in a catastrophic war, whatever happened. Israel would be tied down fighting Hamas, fighting Hezbollah. Iran would have a clear path to developing its nuclear weapons program. And in the last week or so, Iran and the rest of the world discovered that Israel actually can walk and chew gum at the same time, that it is actually capable of fighting Hamas in Gaza, while at the same time also dealing with the larger threat, which is coming out of Iran. And Iran had been built up as this massive, terrifying threat, one that Israel could not even contemplate fighting, much like Hezbollah. We were told about the number of rockets that Hezbollah has. We were told about the arsenal that Iran has. And as it turned out, Iran may have quite a few rockets, but it doesn't have much of a modern functional military, because they invested a lot of their efforts into soft power, into also building up alliances of terrorists, into subverting other countries. But when they came to their own military, there was not much there. Now, this is important because it was really a part of an argument that was being waged during the Cold War. We were told that the Soviet Union was so absolutely terrifying that all we could hope to do was occasionally fight some of their proxies, which we did to varying effects in Korea and obviously to disastrous degree in Vietnam and elsewhere. We had to just be very, very, very careful because the idea of contemplating an actual direct conflict was unthinkable. There were nuclear weapons at stake and all that. And this was demolished not only the image of Iran as this regional superpower, nobody's taking Iran seriously anymore, whatever the outcome of the Israeli attack. The countries that were in the past might have been intimidated by Iran no longer are. But also we've demolished this idea that had been crippling the United States of America. The idea that we cannot directly confront the state powers that are leveraging terrorism against us. We have to just deal with the proxies. And when we deal with the proxies, that is, for the most part, a no-win scenario. We're chasing guerrillas, we're chasing insurgents, we're chasing terrorists around. They pop in, they pop back, a few $1 million gets transferred, they bring in a few more people in a backward and relatively poor society. And we have to leverage all our assets, all our capabilities just to deal with that. And we saw how badly that worked out in Iraq and Afghanistan. We saw how badly that worked out with Yemen. It's really not a viable scenario. And we have not found any kind of solution in over 70 years of dealing with this. Israel, however, has found a solution, and it's a transformative solution. It's a solution based on courage. Obviously, there are brilliant tactics and strategies at work here, but Israel basically cut the Gordian knot. Back in the day, there was a legend about Alexander the Great. He comes to this particular community, country, where they have this Gordian knot. And you have to be able to untangle this incredibly fiendishly complex knot to be able to earn the right to be the monarch. And Alexander simply takes out his sword and cuts it. And that's what Israel did with Iran. They took out the sword and they cut the Gordian knot. And this whole complicated mix, can Israel deal with Hamas? Can Israel deal with Iran? How can we possibly resist international pressure? Well, what Israel actually went ahead and did was it struck to the heart of the problem. And right now we see actually a change of behavior from a lot of the international community, the same countries that were very urgently saying that Israel needed to make a solution. They were going to preemptively recognize a Palestinian state. Macron in France was aggressively pushing for this establishment. Suddenly they're now actually quieting down a bit because for the moment, Israel is actually doing something significant. When Israel is fighting terrorists locally, then they feel very free to go ahead and call for a terrorist state because they want to pacify their own Muslim populations. They're subjected to their own leftist agendas. But when Israel actually does something that affects them significantly and meaningfully, which is what Israel has actually been doing in Iran, suddenly there's a reevaluation. Suddenly there's a sense that Israel is actually a major player on the world stage and that other countries should actually be thinking about what they can do in their arrangements with it, including winning it over. So when Israel actually exercises its power, when actually Israel plays a role on the world stage rather than getting bogged down fighting terrorism, when Israel cuts the Gordian knot, when it bypasses all the terrorist proxy armies that are around it, then Israel suddenly is actually a player on the world stage. And a lot of the international pressure that people in Israel, pro-Israel supporters in the United States are worried about, a lot of that dissipates because the pressure is leveraged against countries that seem to be losing, that seem to be tied down, that seem not to have answers. When Israel actually strikes back, when it actually makes a difference, whether against Hezbollah, whether against Iran, then suddenly there's a geopolitical reevaluation. Israel now suddenly has a new and important role to play on the world stage. And that's what Israel demonstrated. In the past, there's been the sense that Israel needs to minimize its capabilities. It pursues purity of arms. It ties its hands behind its back. It does everything possible to avoid international criticism. With Iran, Israel has gone the other way. It's actually been forthright. It's actually been aggressive, and it has actually paid off. There's actually less criticism now, less hostility toward Israel now on the international diplomatic stage since Israel launched the campaign against Iran. And there's a lesson to be learned in that. The lesson is cut the Gordian knot. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Superb as ever, and brief, which was doubly appreciated as we are running quite long on time. We have one final presenter. His name is Ken Abramowitz. We have saved, in a way, the best for last because one of the things that I've come to admire tremendously about this man who has made his name as a wildly successful hedge fund investor in the healthcare industry, but who has dedicated about half of his professional time of late to advancing the national security interests of the United States is that he has not only conceived of, but articulated very clearly the character of the conflict that we find ourselves in now. This is the context in which this particular war, the war against Iran, is taking place. And for that matter, the war against others that I call Sharia supremacists. And we wanted Ken to wrap up in his inimitable way.
Right. Minister Ohad Tal has joined us.
Splendid. Hold the thought on Ken. We will be right back. Pesach, would you please introduce our distinguished guest, a member of the Knesset?
I know that we're very grateful for member of Knesset, Ohad Tal, who's been in and out of meetings. Member of Knesset Tal sits on the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee in the Knesset, which, as you could imagine, is a very, very busy place to be right now. And he's a dear friend and one of the clearest thinkers in the Knesset. And I know a lot of people in the Knesset, and he's a clear communicator of what is true and what is right for Israel. So I know that it's been very busy. Once again, we're very grateful, but bringing greetings from the Knesset. Thank you, member of Knesset Tal. The floor is yours.
Okay, shalom everyone, and thank you so much for having me. I don't want to ruin your schedule, and I know that you were behind the schedule, so I don't want to take much of your time. I would just say, and I'm sorry I'm in delay and I couldn't join you on time actually, so I couldn't hear everything that has been said, and it's because I've been in security briefing, and I really apologize for that. But I can only say that Israel is now fighting a war which is not just for our sake. You understand that. I don't have to explain that to you. But Iran had three pillars, I would say, in their plan to destroy Israel. One of them was naturally the missiles. The second was building the infrastructure of the 6 armies around Israel. And the third was, of course, the nuclear plan. What we're trying to do now in this operation, in this war, in this campaign, is to take down the 3 pillars. We've basically started already in the last 20 months to destroy the 6 armies, which in the Iranian view, they thought that would be impossible. I mean, just think about it, that we are now attacking in Tehran, and Hezbollah, once Iran's most praised attack dog, cannot do a thing. Or, you know what, I don't know if they cannot, but for sure they are not willing to do anything because they are afraid, because they've lost most of their capabilities, and they're not willing to jeopardize what they still have in order to protect Iran. And their whole purpose of their existence was for that day, and yet the day has come and they're not operating. So that's a remarkable thing that has already changed the Middle East. But we have all the intentions to take down the second and the third pillars of the Iranian regime, and hopefully the result will be at the end taking down the regime. Because if we really want, the only way to really end the nuclear plan of Iran is by taking down the regime. Everything else we all understand will only be delaying or postponing the execution of their plan for the coming years. So I think, again, of course, it's not officially in the war plans of Israel. It's not part of the official war plans to take down the regime, but we definitely do hope that the reality would be that the Iranian people will take this historic opportunity and will throw the Ayatollahs away from power. I can say a lot of things because there's so much things we can say about the war and the different aspects of what is actually happening and the challenges that we are facing and what our goals are. But again, I don't want to take much of your time. So I think we'll leave it at that. If you have any questions, of course, I'll be very happy to address them and answer. But I think that'll be it for now.
May I just suggest, Pesach, maybe you might put a question to
Sure.
the member.
Yeah.
Shalom, Frank. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us, and appreciate you doing so under difficult circumstances.
Member of Knesset Tal, if you could just make us smart, looking ahead, everyone's wondering, what's the plan here? How long is this going to go on? Is this a weeks-long campaign, a months-long campaign? Are we trying to topple the regime? Could you just set the record straight about what is the plan here? And also, one very important question. There are mixed messages about whether Israel is requesting American involvement. Can you clear up what the current state of affairs is on this?
You're asking all the right questions, which unfortunately I cannot give you the full answer. There's a reason why we are keeping it vague. Also about how long the campaign should be, and also about what we expect from America. It's very important to keep these things a little bit vague. And I can only say about the following. We had 5 goals set for this campaign. The first was to damage Iran's nuclear plan. That was the first. The second was to damage their missiles plan. The third was to damage their plan to destroy Israel. The fourth was to create the conditions to eliminate Iran's nuclear plan, and that's a different than the first. The fifth is to minimize the civilian casualties in Israel. So these are the 5 goals that we set to ourselves for this campaign. Now, obviously, if we will do it by ourselves, we will manage to accomplish all the above up to a certain level. And if America will join and will be part of that, of what I think can be historic success, that will change history forever, that will change the Middle East, it will change the entire world forever, that will be up to America to decide. We cannot make that decision for the president, we cannot make that decision for America, but for sure, it will help us promote and achieve these goals in a much broader and deeper way. So we're very hopeful that it will happen, but even if it will not, we took the decision to launch this attack on Iran, this preemptive attack, knowing that there's a big chance that we will have to do it all by ourselves. So, of course, we have the support and the backing of America. We have now the ammunition, which we didn't have under the Biden administration, naturally, so that's a big change. But that's only backing Israel. It's not joining forces with Israel. And we're still willing, and we will accomplish our mission, even if it will only be us doing it by ourselves. But we definitely hope, and by the way, also you asked about the time frame. If America will join, that definitely will allow us to achieve our goals, which in a much shorter time. So that can definitely help also in that regard. But I'm sorry, I know that I'm not saying much because I want to be very careful with everything I'm saying.
Understood.
I know that a lot of people saying a lot of things around this war, but it's not the same when a minister in the government or a member of the Security and Foreign Affairs Committee saying things. It's also it's much different because at the end of the day, we are sitting around the tables where decisions are being made, and when we are saying things that are beyond just giving our thoughts and ideas, but we are saying things that can have a lot of implications about the next moves and about the approach of America towards this campaign. So I don't want to risk, everything is so sensitive and so delicate. So unfortunately, I cannot say much about what you just asked me.
Understood, member of Knesset Tal. We're grateful for what we can get, and we're grateful for your time. Thank you so much, and Godspeed in your sacred work.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Amen. Let me just complete my introduction to Ken Abramowitz. Ken has several important organizations that he supports in his half of the time that he spends on the national security portfolio. SaveTheWest.com is a wonderful online resource that I commend to you all. And his Citizens for National Security, an organization based in his home state of Florida, is a very important contributor to the fight, one of our partners in much of the work that we do at the Victory Coalition and our Institute for the American Future. Ken Abramowitz, thank you for your patience. Thank you for being willing to bat cleanup and for doing so succinctly in your inimitable way.
Okay, great. Thanks, Frank. It's wonderful to be here, and I'm going to try to summarize what everyone said with some thoughts of my own in certainly less than 5 minutes. Number one, I regard where we are today as World War III. And I regard the beginning of World War III, there's many different dates, but the beginning is October 7th of 2023, when Israel was attacked by the Hamas massacre. The day later, the Hezbollah attack, all under the watchful eyes of Iran, and who were under the watchful eyes of China and Russia. So I call that a world war. Now, if you want to go further back into history, you could say World War III began 1400 years ago when Muhammad and his followers made the decision to leave what we now call Saudi Arabia and take over the world. And they proceeded to take over roughly 55, mostly Christian countries. And the Christians have been losing for 1400 years with a few exceptions. And the Jews have been losing for 1400 years with a few exceptions. And so you could say World War III is actually World War I. And it's a never-ending war because the Christians and Jews refused to defeat the Muslims. So we came to the stage where we had two elephants in the room, Iran representing the Shiites and Qatar represent the Sunnis. And these two elephants in the Middle East were trying to take over all the Middle East, then take over the world, and then convert everybody to Islam or kill them. So I call them both Islamo-Nazi death cults. And then all of a sudden, they overplayed their hands. And the Israelis were so outraged at the genocide of October 3, which, by the way, would have led to the death of everybody in Israel if it hadn't been stopped, that Israel's now finally on a war path. By the way, October 7th was also a war against America, but Americans don't know that. So, but Israel knows it. So Israel's leading the counterattack. The most important counterattack since the Crusades, since the defeat of the Muslims in Spain and in Vienna. And now Israel can't be stopped. America can stop if it has to, but otherwise, Israel is on its way to destroy the Iran death cult, the Iran elephant, over the next 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks, as they blow up at least 100 sites a day, unrelentingly, and they're just going to destroy the country day after day after day. And the history of death cults is they don't surrender. So I expect it to continue until there's such death and destruction that maybe the Iranian people kill their own leaders if Israel doesn't get to them. But in any case, within a few weeks, Iran will be toast. And now, to me, in my mind, who's going to replace the Iranian death cult? Who's the logical candidate would be Qatar, the other elephant in the room. It could be China. But the natural country to replace Iran and influence is America, aided by Israeli military might. The Iranians love America and they love Israel. We could end up, if we play this right, we can end up with the most important victory in 1400 years and reverse the 1400-year march of the Islamic death cult to kill all the Christians and all the Jews and Hindus, if they could get to it, and take over the world. So I'm going to say I'm optimistic, very optimistic over the next month, and that is, if it's played right, we could have a reversal of 1,400 years of misadventure and lead to very, very positive development for Israel and America as Judaism and Christianity, or Judeo-Christian culture, reasserts its supremacy over the Islamic death cults. So that's the end of 1,400 years of history in 5 minutes. Frank, thanks for having me. And everyone should look at my new book, the 4th edition of The Multi-Front War, which is out now in the last week on Amazon and other such online venues.
Ken, thank you. A perfect wrapper to a program dedicated to the multi-front war, Israel's specifically. But thank you for backing the lens up and showing how it is ours as well. We're going to conclude with just some very brief comments from Rabbi Wolicki and myself. And Pesach, over to you.
Well, that was a fantastic presentation by Ken. Thank you. You know, putting this whole evening, well, it's an evening here in Israel, afternoon in the States, has been about clarity and really looking the problem in the eye. So when Ken says that this is really a 1,400-year-old war, and when Daniel, points out with clarity that the West always fails to call the problem what it is. And when Itamar, emphasizes that point, even though he spoke before him, by pointing out that the Palestinian Authority is not moderate. And every single one of our speakers, I'm not going to go through all of them, was bringing clarity to us about what this is really about. Robert Spencer talking about, taqiyya and what the Muslim theology calls on them to do in terms of deception. We don't want to ignore the reality. And that's really what October 7th did in a positive way to Israel. Hopefully we go the distance. And I'll end with this. The greatest example of this problem, in my opinion, is what this war is really about according to our enemies. Sun Tzu said that if you know yourself and not your enemy, even if you think you have a victory, you'll have suffered a defeat. And Hamas calls this war the Al-Aqsa flood. They name it after the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount? It's nowhere near the Gaza Strip. But they know that who controls the Temple Mount? And let's remember that our enemies claim that there was never a Jewish temple there. If there was never a Jewish temple there, then Judaism and Christianity are both false. But they say that this war is over the Temple Mount because they know what we should know, is that whoever controls the narrative over the Temple Mount controls the narrative over the land of Israel and the narrative over the world. And that's what this war is really about. And I'll end this by saying that I think that Israel will have made a grave, grave error if at the end of this multi-front war, when the dust settles and all the negotiations are happening and the terms of defeat or victory are being determined, if we don't change the status quo on the Temple Mount, where today both Christians and Jews are restricted in their worship because of Muslim supremacy on the Temple Mount, if we don't change that status quo, then we will continue to cede the narrative and lose the battle to our enemies. So that's what real victory is really about. As I started the evening by saying, ultimate victory is that the enemies recognize the error of their ways, truth reigns, and God's kingdom rules the earth. Over to you, Frank.
Amen. I want to conclude my part of this by putting everything that we have heard in sharp relief against the backdrop of what is happening here inside the United States at the moment, specifically inside what has come to be known as Donald Trump's base, the Make America Great Again base. And people who profess to speak for it are much in evidence at the moment, particularly on social media and a few other televised platforms, holding forth on what the threats are here, what the realities of our circumstances are, and most especially what America should be doing. And they've cloak themselves in the mantle of Donald Trump's America First agenda. I believe, critically analyzed, as their efforts must be, it's much more a Lindbergh America First agenda. That would be Charles Lindbergh, the famed aviator who, in the run-up to World War II, insisted on American isolationism and appeasement of, indeed, he was profoundly admiring of Adolf Hitler. Of course, as things worked out, that became a very black mark on an otherwise impressive career. Today, we're hearing people who are, I believe, no less isolationists or defeatists, though, again, they would have you believe they are nationalists, or they are realists, or they are simply advocates of American restraint. I personally believe that is a profoundly misleading characterization. It's not restraint, it is retreat they are sounding. It is defeatism. And it is coming to a head in the context of the present moment and what the United States should think about and do about the conflict at hand. We've had a bit of a discussion about whether the Israelis are, as they claim, intent on dragging America into this war. You've heard from a member of the Knesset that they would like America's help. Clearly, they are getting America's help in several important respects. Material assistance with weapons resupply, intelligence, it appears, defense against some of the attacks coming Israel's way, and I think, not least, the diplomatic support that President Trump has provided Israel to this point, for which I think we all should be profoundly grateful, because it has helped make possible what Ken Abramowitz just talked about, an outcome here that would be historic in the best sense of the word for Israel, for sure, for the Middle East more broadly, for the United States of America, undeniably, and the free world writ large, namely the decisive defeat of an enemy of all of those. Now, there are others who, in this community of professed MAGA champions, who are quite convinced that a deal can yet be worked out with the Iranians. And we've heard very powerful reasons why that cannot happen, whether we try or not. And I believe that Donald Trump made a serious effort to do just that for 60 long days. One, as we have heard from Robert Spencer, Iran believes it is its religious duty not only to achieve the ultimate victory, of course, for Allah, but also to lie, to ensure that it succeeds. There is a tradition beyond that in the Islamic world, based on the model of the perfect man, Muhammad, what is known as a hudna. It's not a peace. It's just a suspension of hostilities until the Muslim party becomes strong enough to resume hostilities under favorable conditions and thereby destroy their enemy. A very, very important point was made early on in the program, that the effect of even treating with these Sharia supremacists will prevail, unfortunately, I'm afraid, on altogether too many people in Iran who might otherwise help bring about their liberation. If they think we're going to sell them out again, as we have done repeatedly, through the very process of a deal making that keeps the mullahs in power, they will be slaughtered. And they have no intention of doing that. They've been traumatized for far too long. I personally believe if there is any point to a negotiation at this juncture, it is to achieve the unconditional and complete surrender of the mullahs, not any arrangement that legitimizes them and perpetuates their misrule and everything else that will flow from it. And let's be clear what that is. If Israel is denied by us the decisive victory that is in their vital interest as well as ours, the war will continue. Make no mistake about it. A war that, again, these restraint advocates fail to acknowledge is even happening at the moment, let alone that one of its features is the Iranian regime pursuing a nuclear weapons program. The terrorism will continue because that's what these jihadis do. And not least, the weapons of mass destruction programs will continue. And it will be not just the nuclear one, you can bet, but also chemical, biological, and others as well. A second problem with believing that we can, in fact, create a positive outcome from a defeat, which is, as a practical matter, what is in prospect if there is not a decisive victory. Sharia supremacists worldwide will be emboldened by seeing what one of their own has done, securing, in effect, a victory, albeit at a very high cost, at the expense of enemies of Sharia, the Judeo-Christian civilization's champions. And you can bet the Qataris will be only too happy to pay the tab, and the Turks will be only too happy to try to fill a vacuum that Ken Abramowitz talked about might emerge. And finally, and this is very important to those of us who believe that the greatest threat we face worldwide, bar none, is that posed by the Chinese Communist Party. You can take it to the bank, ladies and gentlemen, that the Chinese communists will go for it in the Pacific, in Asia. If we fail to crush their client, their ally, when we have the opportunity to do so, they will be emboldened by the impression that we lack the will to contend with evil, which the Chinese communists certainly represent, as do their clients and allies around the world. But they also will know that we will be tied down in the Middle East by the ongoing war we have enabled to continue. And that, too, will be an inducement to them to believe that they can have their way with Taiwan and who knows who all else. They've just picked off South Korea in the recent coup, masquerading as an election. They have their eyes firmly on Japan, neutralizing it, if not taking it out, and perhaps Guam and Hawaii, among other targets further to the east. We have, in short, ladies and gentlemen, I believe, provided in this program an extraordinary rendering of the hard facts that must be the basis for American policymaking. Not wishful thinking, not name-calling, not appeasement, masquerading as realism or restraint. Our calling, I think I speak for our friends at Israel365 Action as well as I know for those of us in the Victory Coalition, is to rise to this historic challenge, to support the nation of Israel, whose leadership has had the courage to take an action that has long been needed and that might have been missed altogether if it were not seized at this moment, to the everlasting shame, not just the disastrous danger, to those of us who champion, who have benefited from, and hope to pass on to our children and our children's children the glories of Judeo-Christian civilization. Thank you very much for your attention. Please, when this product is available, as Didi will describe momentarily, share it as widely as you can. Every American and every Israeli and everyone, frankly, throughout the free world, the Judeo-Christian world, needs to know of the important contents of this program. We're very proud to have brought it to you in partnership with Israel365 Action. For the Victory Coalition, over now. Back to you, Didi.
Thank you, Frank. A video of this webinar will be posted to victoryco.org within a day of the conclusion of our program. Please share this and our other programs with your elected representatives, colleagues, and other networks. You can follow the Victory Coalition on X at CO4Victory and find more information at Israel365Action.com for news and updates. Thanks so much for joining us today, and goodbye.